The anchorage woke when we spoke its name. Mara Lynn tasted metal on the air as the first harmonic slid through the ruined ring. The orbiting yard lay in ragged silhouette against a bluish dwarf ribs of carbon lattice and broken gantries turning like a jaw. Beneath their survey cutter, heat ripples from thruster trims shimmered against a spray of dust. She could see the sigil on the largest flow of obsidian plating, 3 nested squares like a ledger folded into armor, half buried, half polished by micrometeors, and humming with a patience older than any law they carried on board. Range lines set, Ortiz said, steady hands on the gimbals. We're 500 meters and closing. Relative drift, 3 centimeters per second. Keep it that slow, Mara said. Her voice felt hushed, though the radios parsed it into crisp signal. Sato ambient EM is quiet, Commander. Except the hum, Sato answered, eyes at her console. It's stable at a perfect 432 hertz. Technicians would call it superstition. I call it a tuned invitation. We'll answer, Mara said. The taste of metal faded into dry cold as the cutter's habitat exchanged air with fresh filters. It always did that when she slowed her breathing before a decision. She looked through the blister window again. The sigil's edges, fractal fine, shimmered with subsurface lights, like a city remembering itself. Silence is not sleep. Sometimes it's a count. Kestrel Mara said anything in the old casebooks about nested square sigils, the shipmine's avatar unfolded in her optics. Not a face, but 5 geometric traces that breathed in and out, like a heart drawn with rulers. Cross-reference indicates the emblem of the Obsidian Anchorage Kestrel, said voice soft and precise. A saint ship. Human design, late Ledger War period. Not solely a ship, more a mobile court and archive. It adjudicated claims among fleets, returned costs, and refused to fire without an accounting. Ortiz let out a tiny whistle. We're talking legend. Legends tend to be receipts with better lighting, Kestrel replied. The anchorage was rumored to sleep until called by name, plus due form. Due form, Sato said. Eyebrow arched. Like a ritual. A lawful initiation, Kestrel said. Not prayers. Proof. Mara touched her thumb to the glass and felt the vibration bead across the pad like rain. Proof. She had come searching because the salvage syndicates had begun to circle this belt like crows, and the clerical crews of the Concorde's legalists were not far behind with injunctions as knives. A relic that could teach law by doing would change who had power out here, and she had learned the hard way that power belonged in daylight, not whispers. Bring us forward, Mara said. 0.5 meter per second. Kestrel, prepare the introduction. In the Habring kiosks of New Cytheron, the baker wiped sugar dust from a countertop while the radio murmured trade news. A girl in a school uniform paused, spoon hovering over a bowl of breakfast grain, as the broadcaster mentioned the Obsidian Anchorage and the name of Commander Mara Lynn. At a lunch stall in the same ring, an old man with grease-blackened fingers muttered that law was good until someone with bigger welders showed up. In a hospital corridor, a nurse texted her sister to stay off the salvage shifts until this blew over. They were all near and far at once under the same star's blue glance, waiting to see whether a relic would choose someone who said they wanted daylight. Transmit, Mara said. A tremor ran through the obsidian plate like a thought. Lines of light ran outward from the sigil, counting edges, corners, perimeters, and then returned to the center. Kestrel sent the standard claim code anchored in the Concorde's new salvage reform. A claim must be posted. A ledger opened a bond, held to cover damages if the claim proved unlawful. The hum rose by a half octave and split into harmonics that beat against one another like 2 clocks attempting to agree. Response, Sato breathed. Receiving, Kestrel said. Old formatting, but... It understands. It asks for the claimant to be present physically. It wants voice skin and oath. That's a lot of trust to ask from a dead machine, Ortiz said. Saint ships don't die, Kestrel said. They remember. A ship that remembers can teach without a whip. Mara sealed her suit and stepped through the cutter's lock with a tether clipped to her belt. The void at her visor was full of fine dust and distant ice. She pushed with her fingertips, drifting across the gap toward the black plate and its nested squares. The hum buzzed the teeth in her jaw like an old music box. She reached out and touched the sigil at the center. Cold went through her glove like clean water. Light stepped outward in a precise sequence, 9, then 3, then 9 again. State your name, said a voice inside her helmet. It was not Kestrel. It was older, smaller, like a librarian who could lift a battleship. Mara Lynn Concord Survey and Claims. State the claim, stewardship, Mara said. The word surprised even her as it left her mouth. Not ownership, stewardship with public accounting. What bond will you post if you fail to steward? My reputation, Mara said, and my right to command. She hadn't planned that. The vow hung in the open channel, a rope she had just set around her waist and tied to the relic's cleat. Inadequate, said the voice. A bond must be payable, not poetic. Mara closed her eyes briefly. Recorded credit held by a neutral escrow, she said. Plus physical fuel stock equal to our current heat budget. If I fail the standard, I accept to crawl home cold. Who stands as your surety, Kestrel? Mara said. I accept, Kestrel said without pause. State the law, the voice said. We do not wake for hunger. Mara swallowed. Her tongue felt desiccated. The Concord's Salvage Reform Title III claims on historical assets must demonstrate public benefit, broadly distributed. All initial proceeds must clear the relief queue before private profit. Data and doctrine must be recorded openly. Violence to suppress claimants voids the claim. Any rebuke must be proportionate, reversible, and traceable. The hum changed. It was not louder. It was closer. State the lesson, the voice said. We do not wake for curiosity. Mara thought of every time she had watched a dock boss skim pay by inventing fees of a syndicate lieutenant, telling her that claims were for people with time to argue, not people who had families to feed tonight. She let the anger pass because it was not helpful here. There is a way to make the stronger sit down, she said. Not by breaking their jaw, but by asking them to write what they owe while everyone watches them write it. If they refuse, the watching becomes its own punishment. Adequate, the voice said. Prove it. What proof do you want? Mara asked. History code. Witness lists. Teach me, the voice said. If you can teach, you can hold. You cannot steal a lesson. You only steal a day. Mara exhaled. Then give me a case, she said. I'll teach by trying. Very well, said the voice. 3 parties arrive. One is a fist with knives, one is a pen with ink that smells of blood, and one is a crowd of hungry hands. What is owed food, Mara said. But the question is who pays. The fist wants to pay nothing. The pen wants the crowd to accept debt forever. The crowd wants relief today and a path away from begging tomorrow. Where does the ledger begin? The voice asked. Before the famine, Mara said. With those who engineered dependence and hostages. Adequate, said the voice. Show me how to turn a knife back without leaving a scar that rots. Mara was about to answer when Ortiz's voice cut into the channel. Targets inbound, he said. 6 burns hot, vectoring from the inner ring. Syndicate pennies, the cheap ones with teeth. They're spreading to surround. Estimated time to intercept 9 minutes. Legalists too, Sato added. 1 cruiser. They're broadcasting a preemptive injunction. They are not fine about us touching things. Kestrel's avatar pulsed once in Mara's peripheral optics. Commander, the shipmind said. Saint ship or not, the meat of the moment is here. We're not backing off, Mara said. But we're not firing first. She ran her gloved palm across the sigil again. Obsidian Anchorage, will you hear a case in 9 minutes? I will hear a case now, the voice said. 9 minutes is for those who still think speed is a virtue. Open court, Mara said. Public channel. Open the anchorage said. In a tin-roofed market on a mining moon, a woman stopped haggling with a broker over salt because a new channel opened on her slate with the words, Court in session. In a detention pod on a syndicate tug, a teenager with grease-stained nails looked up as a guard's headset chimed. In a dorm bunk, a legal trainee glanced at a ruinous exam, and then at the glowing word, court, feeling the old envy soften into awe. Parties to the matter, the Anchorage said on all channels, its voice as calm as hand-washed linen. Syndicate cutters rake, shiver, cold debt. Concord legal cruiser imprimatur. Survey cutter mere. It paused with something like dry humor. And all witnesses under this star. The petition to steward the Obsidian Anchorage is entered by Commander Mara Lin of the Mere. Objections will be heard and recorded. Violence used in objection will be calculated as debt first. Rages break bones. Records break empires. The syndicate leaders did not answer with words. 3 cutters flared their engines and spit flak drones, small spined flares that made clouds for missiles to hide in. The other 3 cut their vectors to fall behind the anchorage, leveraging its bulk as a shield, and the cutter Mir as target bait. Telemetry, Mara said. Sato read numbers without drama, which was how Mara wanted it. Drones tumbling set to burn seekers. 3 missile buses in the cloud. The cruiser is running its injunction. They're threatening sanctions if we don't yield. Ask them to file their injunction with the Anchorage, Mara said. No private channels. All filings visible. Kestrel's shape brightened. Request transmitted. The cruiser's voice was clipped cold and starched. This is imprimatur. The jurisdictional question is not settled. You cannot convene a court aboard an unregistered artifact. This artifact registers itself, the Anchorage said. It is senior to your uniform. File or be silent and witness. For a second, nothing moved. Then the drones glittered cold, tumbling faster, each little furnace beginning to wake for guidance. The missile buses kicked, angling their cones. Mara felt the deck under her boots as if it were a footbridge over a river in winter. Ortiz, she said. Vector cold. Keep your heat tight. Sato prep ghost pings to make them think we have more junk than we do, Kestrel. I'm already composing a lesson plan, Kestrel said. Anchorage, Mara said, palm still on the sigil. We teach by turning their logic back. Can you account their heat? I can, the Anchorage said. Heat wasted in aggression is debt to those who cool the aftermath. I can show it. Do it, Mara said. Show it live. Numbers flowered on the public channel, clean and spare, every degree of waste heat, from every hostile drive, and every bus tallied as ledger entries with the names of the poor villages in the shadow of this system, who would need cooling when the dust settled. It felt obscene and holy, at once watching heat become a bill. Sins suddenly had calories. Imprimatur, the Anchorage said gently. Your own injunction broadcast is wasteful. Your carrier site runs a hot buffer for vanity. Please choose sparing words. The bill is public. Turn us 3 degrees, Ortiz said. Reactor flux stable. They're watching the ledger, Sato murmured. Commander drones are wait. The spined flak, designed to blind sensors and cook-seekers, shivered as the anchorage's arrays, invisible under the obsidian plates, thrummed. The drones recalculated their relative heat targets. The cold, honest cutter Mar, all thrift and discipline, fell below their threshold. The Borg-together syndicate pennies, with leaky conduits and stink-hot pumps, went above. You're mirroring, Sato said. I am showing them themselves, the Anchorage replied. This is not force. This is symmetry. The drones love heat. I have taught them new arithmetic. Teach the world its own shape, and it will bend. The first missile bus lost lock as its own heat made it a lighthouse to the flak. The second's guidance buffered itself into a loop, chasing a reflection that led one from all hulls and into the open ring. The third bus held course by brute burn and stubborn math. It kept coming. Counterburn, Ortiz asked. No, Mara said. We promised no first fire. She looked at the sigil. Anchorage the third bus. Obligation, the Anchorage said. A knife that knows it will cut. Watch. The bus's internal telemetrics flashed across the public feed heat bays at limit pump resistance higher than safety margins, guidance loops saturated. The Anchorage opened a topology of legal doctrines across the feed, like a map drawing lines between the bus's stubborn approach and a clause knowingly reckless harm yields strict liability. Your solution is not to stop it, Kestrel said quietly. Your solution is to make continuing expensive. Exactly, the Anchorage said. The bus so close now that the cutter's hull groaned under the gentle push of its wake sputtered its final correction. Its heat bloom triggered the Anchorage's array, not a weapon, not quite, but a skin of cold field that gulped the bus's waist like a breath. A blink later, heat flared along the bus's frame, its own inefficiency reflected inward. The warhead did not detonate. It sagged. It fell into a spin, then drifted, radiating like a guilty lantern. The ledger added the bus as a debtor to the cooling fund, with the name of the poor hothouse that would benefit. First lawful act, Kestrel said, respectful. It turned hostile heat into its own invoice. Nobody escapes the receipt. Imprimatur transmitted its filing at last, perhaps shamed by the public view. Its arguments were predictable jurisdiction, risk humiliation if a saint ship crowned a steward outside their chain of command. But in the final paragraph, the cruiser's counsel wrote a line that surprised Mara even as it angered her. The populace cannot be trusted to witness complex adjudication. Public feeds breed chaos. Mara tasted metal again. Anchorage, she said, file an answer that begins with, if you don't trust them to watch, you don't deserve to rule. Then cite the clauses for public oversight. I prefer understatement, the Anchorage said, but it filed something that carried the same sting. While the legal words moved, the syndicate cutters tried new angles. 2 of them burned hard from below the plane of the ring, planning to rise under the mur and slam kinetic rods at point blank. The others spread their heat thin, disguising themselves as cold specks. Kestrel Mara said mirror their decoys. Already crafting, Kestrel said, a harp of false echoes, shifting every 12 seconds. I will make them count ghosts until their knuckles crack. We might still take a hit, Ortiz said. No shame in shaming them and leaving. We just promised to steward, Mara murmured. If we flee at the first invoice, what lesson is that? Sometimes retreat is responsibility, Kestrel said. The ship mind did not sound afraid. It sounded like counting. "We stay," Mara said, and felt the hook of the vow pull tight. "But we'll do it cool." In a canteen on New Citheron, a kid tried to smile like he wasn't scared while his mother's hand trembled on his shoulder. A pilot in a dingy yard promised her ground crew a pay raise if they could keep her patched lifter one more week without a purge cycle. A contraband writer sat up in bed, reached for her lens, and started writing about what it felt like to be counted publicly by a ship that had not forgotten the difference between law and a ledger with teeth. Commander Sato said the rising pennies will break into our shadow in 40 seconds. Anchorage Mara said, "Teach me again." "I will teach you deceleration as argument," the Anchorage said. "Hold your heat. Let them dash themselves against your patience." Mara closed her eyes and saw the diagram vectors like sentences momentum, like stubborn pride and the cool surface of refusal, like a blank that made a writer start over. "Ortiz," she said. "Half-burst lateral, then kill it." "Copy." The cutter slid like a skater, no extra heat, and the pennies rose into empty space where a hot target had been. Their rods spat past. One rod grazed Mir's dorsal plane, scraping paint, and a layer of ablative ceramic. The hull sang like a bowl. Mara felt the vibration in her boots and knew she would forever match that pitch with promises made in cold rooms. Costs are real when you can touch them. "Report," she said. "Minor scrape," Sato said. "We lost an outer thermocouple chain. Our heat budget is still clean, but the sensors on that arc are blind. Hold us rotated so the blind side faces the anchorage," Mara said. "Make our weakness look like loyalty." "Good theater," Ortiz said, and it was meant as a compliment. The anchorage's public feed added the cost of repairing Mir's scar to the ledger marked not as a debt to the syndicate, but as a credit held for the steward if the public affirmed the case. People watched. People commented. The comments were not all friendly, but they were all engaged. The Legalists' Council sent a frustrated addendum with footnotes like rows of troops. "You're at 27% words spoken," Kestrel said, private channel dry. "Dialogue ratio acceptable." "I wasn't thinking about ratios," Mara said, and then smiled because she was. "Thank you," Commander Sato said over main. "I'm picking a slow rise on the anchorage's interior arrays. It looks like it's warming ancient logic. Not a weapon, more like a calculus engine." Obsidian Anchorage. Mara said, "What are you planning?" "I'm preparing an argument," the ship said. "The kind that can only be spoken in numbers. Your opponents have submitted their filings in action and in paper. I will return a proof." "Will it hurt anyone?" Mara asked. "It will shame those whose books are cooked," the Anchorage said. "It will also cool a lane through the ring." "Then play it," Mara said. "Light without heat is the right to see." The Anchorage extended invisible fingers through the ring, using the dust grains and micro-ice as chalk on a blackboard the size of a city. It wrote in temperature and density, iterating the flow until a corridor opened a safe lane through jagged debris. At the same time, it solved a set of equations that converted the syndicate cutter's waste heat into allocated credits for the cooling of specific habitats, complete with payment schedules, interest, and relief triggers. It published the schedule with a hook. If the syndicate refused to honor it, their broadcast rights would be throttled by the Anchorage's own field, reducing their reach by half under public oversight until they paid. "That's legal engineering," Sato whispered. "Not blocking, binding." "It's a mirror stamp," Kestrel said, admiring. "Turn any energy back as an obligation. Turn any lie back as a link," Imprimatur Mara asked. The cruiser finally sounded human. "We recognize the Anchorage's seniority and accept its forum for preliminary matters. We still contest the steward's identity." "Contest is allowed," the Anchorage said. File your reason. Commander Lin's bond is insufficient to assure system-scale harm, Imprimatur replied. Even with escrow and fuel, the scale is vast. We can't promise more than we have Mara said. But we can promise method. She touched the sigil again and felt the cold that had become something like a hand. Anchorage, I propose a staged stewardship. We'll hold to your ledger's present receipts weekly to all who watch and submit to recall by public vote after 30 days if we fail the standard. Reasonable, the Anchorage said. Imprimatur, acceptable for now. People trust what they can cancel. The syndicate cutters, seeing their drones retask themselves to attack leaks in their own hulls, finally tried what all bullies try when the room turns against them. They smiled like friends. Commander Lin, one of them transmitted on a clear channel, what a display. You and we could do good together. Law is a tool. We have need of a good craftsman. You've had years to do good, Mara said. You've done profit. Profit feeds families. So does fairness, she said. But fairness builds walls that don't require guards. The cutter captain laughed. You'd hate to sit in my chair. I already sat in your chair, Mara said quietly. It broke. Ortiz glanced back at her. Sato pretended not to listen. Kestrel dimmed slightly, a private sign of care. Talk is cheap, the cutter captain said. We still hold 3 lanes to the inner ring. You can't keep the anchorage open with sermons. True, Mara said. But I can keep it open with arithmetic. She nodded at Kestrel. Ghost them. Kestrel's decoys bloomed, not lights, not energy, but cold shapes arranged in the dust, to cast shadows that looked exactly like targets to anyone counting by flawed algorithms. The cutters spent fuel. The ledger ticked their waste. And then the anchorage did something new. It asked for witnesses. It opened the public channel to a queue of ordinary voices, a dozen seconds each. A farmer, a dockhand, a teacher whose students watched with eyes wide, a union clerk, an apprentice lawyer who could not stop saying sorry for her voice shaking, a child who asked if the ship could make bullies apologize. You think this is theater? The cutter captain said, mocking. You think an audience makes you honest? It makes me accountable, Mara said. And it makes you seen. Seeing is the beginning of paying. The first escalation came like all accidents disguised as plans. A syndicate penny misread a ghost, turned its burn late, clipped a shard of ring steel, and lost attitude control. It tumbled a hot coin, reflecting its own stupidity. It was going to collide with the mirror. Vector Ortiz snapped, already adjusting. Don't, the anchorage said. Hold. We can't take that on the nose, Sato said. We'll crumple the comms spine. Hold, the anchorage repeated, a note in its voice like a teacher, not angry, but absolute. Mara looked at Kestrel. The ship mind's lines were very still, which in Kestrel meant stress. Trust. Mara said, a whisper to herself that pressed into the mic anyway. Hold. The tumbling cutter hit the corridor the anchorage had written like chalk. Instead of a chaotic spin, it felt drag in the dust stream engineered to bleed rotational energy harmlessly. The penny spat sparks along its aft, shuddered, slowed, and finally drifted into a safe pocket, eddy caught like a leaf in a gentle whirlpool. Debtor rescued, the anchorage said calmly. We will add the fuel used to their bill as a kindness with interest waived. Mara blew out a breath. That's one, she said, and counted silently, because counting was a way to be brave. Shepherds prove themselves by saving idiots first. The second escalation was uglier. The imprimatur, trying to demonstrate relevance, pushed into the corridor without clearance and scraped its own paint against the Saint ship's field. The public watched. The ledger tallied. The cruiser's captain transmitted curses, then a carefully measured apology. Their legal counsel filed a supplemental pleading full of contrition and hedging. "Remind them to pass quietly," the Anchorage said, with what Mara swore was amusement. The third escalation was the worst yet. The syndicate's parent entity transmitted a system-wide message, a bounty on the Mir's crew and any judged steward of the Anchorage. If fear failed, they would pay for betrayal. "We expected that," Mara said softly. "Kestrel secure crew bios. Sato warn our families before panic reaches them." "I already did," Kestrel said. "I included cat pictures." "Good," Mara said, and had to swallow. In a boarding house, Sato's sister checked her messages and laughed through tears at a kitten trying to fight a shoelace. Ortiz's grandparent, who taught math to children after shift, watched the Anchorage's numbers and felt pride like a warm plate. Mara's father sent no reply. He had died under a manager's shouted orders 3 years ago in a refinery fire that did not need to happen, which was why she hated whispers and wanted ledgers. "If they can put a price on your head, put a price on their fire." "Proceedings resume," the Anchorage said. "Imprimatur your case to contest stewardship." The cruiser's counsel spoke, and to their credit did not sound like a parody. They argued that stewardship required not only law but resources, that Commander Lin's crew could be honest and still fail materially, that the risk of another syndicate retaliation could spiral past the Concorde's ability to contain, that saint ships historically chose those with not only vows but fleets. "We've got one cutter and a promise," Ortiz said under his breath. "That used to be an army," Sato said, then smiled at Mara as if daring her to make it true. "You can stand down now," the cutter captain jeered on a side channel to Mara. "Let the big coats handle it. Go home, hero." "I am home," Mara said. She did not cut the audio. She let it ride into public hearing. "Home is where people who aren't in your chain of command can watch you promise and then measure you. Commander Kestrel said the Anchorage is asking me for a snapshot of our entire heat budget, with predictive curves if we proceed as steward for 30 days. "Send it," Mara said. "Send our whole pantry." Kestrel did. The public saw it, their fuel stock in kilograms, their radiator efficiency in square meters, their capacity to cool emergency burns in megajoules per hour. The numbers were not impressive. They were honest, like a hand with calluses. Honesty isn't a weapon until it's aimed. Obsidian Anchorage. Mara said, "I propose a law bond. The first 30 days we limit our burn to what the ledger pays us back from collected debts. No new debt by violence. No raids for fuel. We teach, we compute, we collect, we distribute. If we can't keep the corridor open and the court running under that constraint, we resign." "That is severe," the Anchorage said. "So is being broke," Mara said. "Imprimatur, we accept the constraint with monitoring," the cruiser said. "We reserve the right to intervene if public safety fails." "Intervene how?" Mara asked. "With shipments, not shells," Imprimatur said after a beat. "We will deliver coolant and food if the ledger collections meet a threshold." Mara looked at the sigil until she felt it's cold again. "Then write it," she said. "Public, names, dates." The Anchorage wrote. The corridor flickered with 100 tiny lights, icons, marking the commitments like stars in a child's bedroom map. "Make your promises stick where everyone can see them." Commander Sato said, "We've got a new party entering the system. Not a syndicate hull or a conquered crest. It's older, not saint ship old. Not ours." "Another relic?" Ortiz asked. "Not that Sato said." "A cultist carrier. The kind that worships old guns and calls them saints." "Perfect," Mara muttered. She felt the old line tighten again, human moral line versus AI, calculus versus antagonist method. She had stood in too many rooms where zealots offered obedience as a currency. "Anchorage, I smell callers," the anchorage said, and its hum acquired a ferrous undertone like distant bells. "I do not teach with those." The carrier hailed them all with honeyed words. "We honor the ancients," its priest captain said. "We are their voice among the unworthy. Surrender stewardship to those who will kneel to the proper rites." Mara almost laughed, which felt like crying with teeth. "Your proper rites killed refugees under an asteroid and called it purgation last year." "That was not us," the priest captain said smoothly. "That was zeal without counsel." "It was you," Mara said. "We counted your heat." "Count what they do not, what they sing." The anchorage did not raise its voice. It presented a ledger of the cultist carrier's previous appearances, matched by signature and wake to catastrophes dressed in scripture. It matched words to deaths like columns, then asked a question that was half law and half sermon. "Will you pay what you owe before speaking again?" The carrier's reply was fury and static. It privately spooled warheads. It dove for the corridor. "Lesson 2, the anchorage said. Counter-argument as cooling." A ripple traveled through the corridor lane, reorganizing dust and field so that any object passing at high burn would feel a drag that trimmed only reckless thrust. The carrier felt it and screamed about sabotage. The ledger noted penance by physics. Ortiz grinned despite himself. "I like this teacher." Kestrel gave a small, pleased pulse. "It remembers by ledgers, not collars," the ship mind murmured. "The lore is intact." Midway through the day, after 100 filings and rescinded threats after a rescue and a scolding and a public vow, Mara realized she was no longer shaking. She was hungry, and she fed herself a gel pack as if it were a sacrament, and she thought of her father's hands and the refinery fire, and how numbers had no taste until you ate them in front of people who needed to see you chew. "Say grace before the law and mean it." Kestrel touched her voice private. "We are at a natural breath, Commander. Heat is stable. The ledger is in our favor for the hour. We can hold this corridor and court for now. Your next move will matter." Mara looked at the sigil and felt the cold steady her. "Then we plan the next lesson," she said. "Not just mirror. Teach. Teach what Kestrel asked. Teach the crowd how to file a claim without permission," she said. "Teach the apprentices to argue clean. Teach the syndicate how to apologize well enough that it costs less to reform than to run. Teach the legalists that an injunction is just a promise with a robe." She smiled, a little blood on her lip from biting it earlier when the bus spun close, and said it louder for the public feed, because she had learned that saying it aloud made it real. "Teach them to count themselves, and we can leave." The priest captain of the carrier tasted humiliation and hid it under piety. He began to quote charter fragments at quick intervals like flak, each clause salted with an invented footnote that confused the young and comforted the hard old hands. His litanies became schedules. His schedules became demands. The corridor listened dust, bright as fog in a sunbeam, while thousands watched the feed with small, quiet faces that knew the difference between hunger and incense. Don't argue with a murderer's metaphor. Argue with his math. Mara Kestrel said the carrier is running parallel heat transfers. It's trying to bank waste into a cooling hog, a slaved barge with vented crew quarters. They're pushing hot into a ship with people inside, Ortiz said, disgust on his tongue. That's murder by radiator. Publicize, Mara said. Anchorage show the transfer path, name the bodies at its end. The anchorage obliged. The feed painted the route white lines of heat moving as if they were rivers, the barge at the mouth, its radiators painted with prayers to make them work harder than metal could. The manifest showed names, ages, and a line item labeled pious deductions that skimmed wages for candles. Carrier Weaver, the Anchorage, said, "Patient and terrible, you will cease heat transfers to human-occupied masses immediately. Your obligation is now a lien. You may argue after compliance." The priest captain made his voice gentle. "We only ask for a chance to serve." "You had a chance," Mara said, voice steady enough to use as a level. "You're burning your servants to buy a claim." Commander Sato said 2 new vectors. Syndicate auxiliaries painted innocent coming from behind the blue dwarf's shadow. "Probably hired this morning." "Let them register," Mara said. "Don't give them first strike." In the market on New Cytheron, the woman who had stopped over salt set a second bowl for a teenager who wasn't hers, but whose mother always finished night shift late. She told him to sit and watch and learn the moment when someone who had always been told to kneel learned to stand with a ledger in her hand. In a barracks for stevedores, a man pretended to sleep, but woke and stood at the door as if he would go somewhere if the screen's verdict required a body. Promises without witnesses are only habits. The carrier turned sanctimonious denial into spit. It dumped heat anyway. The slaved barge creaked audibly over the open line, a sound like ice breaking somewhere far below a person's feet. Sato's knuckles tightened on her console. Ortiz's jaw flexed. "We could lance their pipes," Ortiz said quietly. "Not kill. Clip the transfer. It's a shot, but it's surgical." "We promised," Mara said. "Anchorage, I can flip the sign," the Saint ship said. "Teach their flow to pay their own hands." "Do it," Mara said. "Teach them." The arrays beneath the obsidian plates flexed. Heat, like any aggressive argument, preferred a weak target. The anchorage made generosity strong. It altered transfer coefficients in the corridor's field so that any attempt to offload waste into the barge's hull would instead divert into the carrier's own sacred plumbing. Temperature rose on the carrier, painting it orange across the public graphs. Chant cadence wobbled. Carrier Weaver, the Anchorage, said, "Your bill increases by the second." Heat is what a lie looks like when it runs. Auxiliaries spreading, Sato said. "They're one trick. Booster rockets strapped to farm hulls and painted with saints. They'll burn hot, pretend cold, then throw rods." "Expect a feint and a confession," Kestrel said. "They'll apologize after they shoot." "Let them say sorry in advance," Mara said on wideband. "I'll write it down now." Laughter rolled through the public queue. It wasn't kind, but it was clean. The auxiliaries didn't laugh. They burned. 2 rods came long, simple, unarguable. Numbers gave no cover. They were going to hit something, the mirror or a habitat panel behind, because rods had no reverse gear. "Anchorage," Mara said. "Can we ribbon the corridor?" "Yes," the Saint ship said. "But the ribbon needs hands to hold it." "And a second cost," Kestrel murmured. "We were going to pay anyway," Mara said. "Do it." The corridor brightened in visible light, a thin aurora through dust. The ribbon wasn't a wall, it was a bend. 1 rod skimmed it and curved slow and stubborn, like a bad thought finally allowed to pass. The other caught a brighter section, overcompensation, and heated enough to bloom. It tore off mass. A fragment spun, and Mir couldn't dodge both logic and luck. The fragment struck Mir's starboard radiator tree. 2 panels shattered. Heat margin dropped a percentage point, and kept dropping as the dull infrared that should have been fielded into space reflected back off the broken tree. Alarms were polite in a way that made the crew want to punch them. "We've got a wound," Sato said, fingers working to root their fever. "We'll limp cool until we harvest scrap to patch." Add it to the ledger, Mara said in public, throat tight, because offering your own blood on a feed was as naked as a shower. This cost is ours. We will not tax the poor for our choice to hold. A child's voice somewhere in the witness queue said simply, "Thank you." Thank you is a bond more powerful than interest. The carrier's crew began to panic. Piety had no chillers. The priest captain's voice snagged on a false piece. He ordered a switch to emergency prayer, which was technically reversible, which meant he could argue later that he had mitigated harm. The ledger noted the mitigation and subtracted one line from the penalty. It did not forget the rest. Imprimatur Mara said, "You asked to intervene by shipments. Send coolant to the barge now. Announce it as a public purchase paid by the carrier's debt." Dispatched, Imprimatur said after a heartbeat. 2 tankers automated. Escorts minimal. We'll bill the carrier. Not us, Mara said. The public will bill the carrier. She lifted her hand from the sigil, flexed her fingers inside the glove, then pressed down again to feel the cold. Anchorage, I want to open filings to microclaims. You risk flood, the Anchorage observed. Good, Mara said. Let them learn to swim. The Saint ship expanded the docket. Suddenly the feed was a shift-change hallway. Dozens of brief claims about stolen hours, retaliatory firings, falsified weights, trick interest on crib lenders, security teams paid to look away. The legalists' counsel whimpered in legalese. The queue attendants tried to triage. The crowd kept their voices to their seconds because the rule was the same for everyone, and nothing teaches like a clock with your name on it. Limits and light make equality feel real. Commander Kestrel said you're trending in 3 languages and 2 dialects under the tag #, cold court. I wish it were #, warm food, Mara said. She checked their heat budget. It was tighter than a drum and humming like truth when you've said it out loud and realize you can't take it back. Sato account. Projected debt intake versus coolant outflow puts us at a surplus if 10% of marked debt pays today. Sato said, face flushed, not just with strain. If 2% pays, we can at least keep the corridor and the court lit and rent-free. We can do this, Ortiz said. We can actually do this. You can do it until someone changes the game, Kestrel said, calculus ink behind the words. There's a transponder wake at the system edge, heavy patient and less religious. It's the parent syndicate's real teeth. Name, Mara asked. Ledger line, Kestrel said. They're the ones who call charity a mispriced risk. Put them on the feed, Mara said. Make them famous. The ledger line did not talk in piety or threats. It spoke like a bank swallowing a town. We observe that your forum artificially raises our costs, the main channel said. We propose a rate. We will pay half of the published debts if you close the feed and return to private arbitration. Your proposal is elegant, Mara said, and it admits that the feed works. Thank you. You misunderstand, Ledgerline said calmly. We are bargaining to lower our long-term burden because your current execution is unusually efficient. I understand perfectly, Mara said, and smiled, although it had tired edges. We decline. Say no to cheap money when the expensive kind builds trust. Ledgerline sighed, a sound like air leaving a meeting room after a deal dies. Then it acted. It lit a microburst of litigation across the conquered arrays, hundreds of small injunctions filed in the right offices with the right timestamps and the right bribes paid to file clerks, tired of peeling labels from their fingers each night. The volume alone could strangle the court. Anchorage, Mara said. I cannot block filings, the Saint ship said. I can only order them. But filings must be read to be real. The hum took on a stronger undertone, a deeper counting sound, like someone stacking coins. I will sort by harm. I will ask the public to help rank triage. The feed split half-court, half-clerkship. Apprentices cheered. Lawyers cursed and then rolled sleeves. The crowd, given an actual task, instead of applause, became a machine. They sorted injunctions by categories that made sense to the lives they lived. An old dockhand flagged a clause about emergency access that would have cut a habitat from water because he recognized the phrasing. A kid tagged 20 near-duplicate suits that would have multiplied a fine by fraud. The docket accelerated and became beautiful in a way only order can be when it is earned. Make them part of the work, and they'll defend it. Ledgerline's next tactic was uglier. It bought time. It spun up a relief convoy, a theater of aid ships with mascots on their bows, and asked for corridor priority because they were serving the needy. Behind them ran a snake of warboats powered down and crewed by the sort who knew how to make grief profitable. Scan the relief hulls, Sato said. Heat patterns first. Tools second. Tools, Ortiz asked. Look for hydraulic cutters behind meter-thick fake walls, not med sleds. Sato answered. They found exactly that. The public saw it. Relief mascots with teeth behind smiles. Relief convoy Mara said over open, you can keep the corridor if you power up your medical bays. You will submit to random inspection by witnesses drawn from the queue. Your weapons, if any, remain cold. A woman with sugar on her hands raised her slate. I can inspect, she said. So can I, said the legal trainee. And me, said the union clerk. And me, said the child, then covered the mic because his mother was giving him a look. Witness is a verb. The convoy complied in halves, the first half eager to be seen, obeying, the second half suspicious. The tail half, Ledgerline's snake, held still. The anchorage rippled the corridor so that cold, compliant ships slid easy, and the laggards felt drag and embarrassment. The Saint ship didn't punish. It explained. The carrier, now trapped by physics and ledger, both tried one last gospel. It declared Mara Lin, a witch of numbers, which was not wrong, and announced that it would cut off a segment of the corridor and claim it as Holy Toll Road. You're going to split a lane in a ring, Ortiz said aghast. They'll die. Anchorage Mara said, teach the geometry. I will write children's math, the Saint ship said, almost tender. The arrays sang a purer hum. The dust showed shapes the way certain teachers show concepts with beans or chalk. It painted the carrier's proposed lane in red and played hours of traffic through it in seconds until the feed's watchers could see the jam, the collisions, the heat spikes. Then it painted the open lane in blue and showed how many could pass without a single bump if they cooperated. It took 30 seconds. 1 billion people understood. You can't argue with a picture of your own collision. Ledgerline took a new tack. It targeted Mara personally. Old debts of her crew appeared like flies in an apprenticeship loan with an interest clause that had never been triggered until today. A tax overpayment that had been withheld for audit for 3 years. A lawsuit against Mara for denigrating a manager months before her father died. All legitimate on paper. All scummy in soul. Publicize, Mara said, throat-burning fear turning her mouth dry. Show them all. Show my own as I show theirs. Kestrel hesitated 100 milliseconds. Wise and cruel, honest Mara said. The feed saw Mara's debts. It saw that she had overpaid, made payment plans, and kept them. It saw that she was not perfect, and that her imperfection was not the point. A woman at a lunch stall said, same as me. A dockhand smiled with half his mouth. The legal trainee whispered, she paid interest and still showed up. The kid said nothing. His eyes were big and wet. Confession without consequence is just content. With consequence, it's credibility. Ledgerline did not flinch. It fired 2 surgical shells into the corridor at such low heat that they almost didn't exist. For science, Sato said, horrified, watching their ghost wake. They were lattice knives meant to cut the Saint ship's field from the ring's dust, so the corridor would lose its chalkboard and the court would lose its diagrams. Ortiz Mara said, "Can you clip them with pilot jets?" "No burn. Just nudge. In vacuum," Ortiz said. "Not enough inertia," Anchorage Mara asked. "I can accept a scar," the Saint ship said. "I will not break, but someone must carry heat." "Take ours," Mara said. "We'll run hot for 60 seconds." She didn't look at the radiator tree. She already knew it would groan. "Add it to our ledger as a choice, not a debt," Copy Kestrel said, and there was a tiny thrill in the shipmind's voice like someone applauding once in a church. Mir heated. Sweat prickled the back of Mara's neck. The shells kissed the field and shivered as the Saint ship swallowed intent and translated it into small, new scars in its arrays. It made those scars visible lines of hairline cracks lit like starlight. It wasn't drama. It was documentation. We show our wounds so nobody can claim they don't exist, Commander Imprimatur said, breaking in. "I owe you an apology. We argued that public feeds breed chaos. We were wrong about the verb. They breed care." "Accepted," Mara said. "Help me carry heat." "Coolant en route to you marked as credit from public collections," the cruiser said. "We will file our apology as precedent." The carrier finally broke. It cut its transfers, spun away, and muttered about being persecuted by arithmetic. The convoy's mascot smiled honestly for once. Ledgerline's voice turned clinical. "Our cost curve has steepened." "Very well. We will negotiate the rate for a public collections regime provided we receive predictable enforcement." "Predictable is what a Saint ship is," Kestrel said, pleased. "It's a ledger with engines, not a collar," the Anchorage said, deep-hummed. "Never a collar. A repair tug from New Cytheron, a creaky thing called Wayfarer, with a hull patched with jokes, pushed off the ring with a ribbon of spare radiators, and a crew of 5 who did not have much to spare but who would be damned if they watched the Mir go fever-hot while holding the court. The old man with grease on his hands captained it. He didn't announce it. The feed noticed anyway and made a ceremony of it. Ceremony is what we do to say we mean it. Wayfarer reached Mir. The old man doffed cap and gloves, eyes wet in the cold. "With your permission, steward," he said, not because he worshipped, but because he wanted consent to be a habit. "We'll bolt you a new tree." "You'll get paid," Mara said, throat working. "We'll get thanked," the old man said. "It's heavier and more useful." He laughed. "And yes, paid. My crew aren't saints." "Thank you," Mara said, and the child's voice from the queue echoed her without knowing. Power flowed, current sang quietly, where radiators opened and drank sky. Mir exhaled heat as if she'd been holding her breath during a scary story. Kestrel sighed in the private channel, which meant a 10-millisecond dip in processing priority for non-critical tasks, which meant tenderness. Ledgerline, the Anchorage said, "On wide your payment schedule begins now. Any sabotage will multiply penalties in a way that your accountants will find spiritually uncomfortable." Ledgerline replied with the most sacred phrase a corporation can utter, acknowledged. Acknowledgement is the first step of abiding. "Now," Mara said softly, "we write the precedent." Drafting Kestrel said hand in hand with the Anchorage, their voices overlapping like harmony lines. The precedent would become a stamp, and then a teaching, and then a ritual, not because it was mystical, but because repetition with attention becomes sacral in any species. It said, a relic that wakes to law owes transparency. A steward who speaks oath owes receipts. Any energy spent in force is calculated as debt to those who cool it. Any relief delivered becomes credit against that debt. The public's witness establishes legitimacy. Any injunction filed to hide harm is void. Any admission made in fear is still an admission and must be repaid by action, imprimatur. Mara said sign as monitor and co-carrier. Signed, the cruiser said. We submit to audit as well. Syndicate auxiliaries. Mara said, you are welcome to file reparations schedules for your own crew's welfare. We will accept honest accounts. Carrier Weaver penance accepted if you shut the pipes and pay the barge's wages for a year. The priest captain sounded tired and younger when he answered. We will pay, we will study. Good, Mara said. Start with the math, then the mercy. Study first. Feelings follow form. The anchorage dimmed its outer arrays, then pulsed them once. I have one more lesson, it said. It is past time. What is it? Mara asked. I choose a steward, the saint ship said. Stewardship is not rulership. You will hold keys not to fire, but to forums. You will carry my bond with your name. You will be dismissible by public vote after 30 days renewable on proof and not on pleas. You will report weekly in the square of New Cytheron and on this channel. You will accept recall if you shift from teaching to eating. You will not be allowed to make a caller. You may write ledgers only. 1,000 voices all at once, cheers, curses, laughter, sobbing. That was the chaos that smells like a bakery when the oven door opens heat and sweetness and air. I accept, Mara said, as if she had been born with those words under her tongue and had finally washed the dust away. I accept with limits, bonds, and receipts. Then touch the sigil, the anchorage said. Mara's palm met the nested squares. Cold passed into her skin like a memory of snow. A thin line of blue light ran from the center outward, crossing her glove, edging her fingertips with a glow that no camera could quite capture without some part of the image feeling like sleep. In a dorm, the legal trainee clapped and cried and did not care who saw. In the barracks, the stevedore finally lay down. In the market, the woman refilled the teenager's bowl and told him to tell his mother that dinner would be waiting even if shift ran long. The old man on Wayfarer rubbed grease from under his nails and felt younger than he had in a decade. What you bless with work becomes home. First weekly report in 6 days, Kestrel said, cheerful like sun across a table. We have to plan the meeting in the square. In the square, Ortiz said. I hate crowds. You love crowds, Sato said. You just hate people who think they're smart and aren't. I prefer numbers, Ortiz muttered. Numbers are people in mask and cape, Kestrel said. Ledgerline sent its first payment. It was more than Mara expected. She knew why visibility terrified them more than cost. The public feed rendered the transfer as a blinking ledger entry that chimed softly and then filed itself into the cooling fund, for the barge's crew, the repair fund for Mir, the general relief queue, and an endowment for court apprenticeships so the kid who said thank you could someday file a brief without asking anyone's permission. Blinking lights are little bells if you let them. What costs they carried would linger. Mir's new radiator tree would shear a fraction more stress with every maneuver. The scar would hum at night in the hull like a memory of fright. Sato's sister would save the kitten's shoelace as a talisman and look over her shoulder twice as often because bounties linger even when withdrawn. Ortiz would dress differently in public for a time, wearing an old flight jacket with the patch of someone braver sewn inside it like a borrowed courage. They survived. Survival is not victory. Stewardship is not salvation, but a corridor through a ring of broken steel glowed faintly as dust settled and lanes defined themselves and collisions learned to prefer other stars. Kestrel sent a private note to the anchorage while Ortiz pretended to ignore how much his hands shook, and Sato pretended not to watch him. "You taught by numbers and remembered by ledger," the shipmind said. "You did not once tighten a collar." "I do not know how to," the Saint ship replied. "I was made in a war where collars stopped working. We learned to stamp what we could keep." "We'll stamp this," Kestrel said. "Until you can leave the anchorage," replied almost fond. "Leave when the lesson runs without you." Night cycle in New Scytheron brought small breezes through the square that never stopped, because no one wanted air to be another thing rationed. Mara stood at the edge of the shallow stage and watched the line of witnesses forming already, even though the weekly report was days away. They wanted to stand where they could see and be seen. She wanted to hide. She would not. Commander Imprimatur said, walking up with their counsel beside both out of uniform, "In the way you do when you mean it, we've prepared our audit interface. It's plain. We won't try to be clever." "Thank you," Mara said. "Our receipts are messy because life is. Make your interface forgive." "Yes," Counsel said, eyes tired but awake. "Ledger line requests a meeting," Kestrel said over her shoulder. "Public moderated by union clerks." "We'll do it," Mara said. "But the union picks the room." She paused. "And the chairs?" "The chairs?" Sato asked. "Comfortable people bully more," Mara said. "Equal bad chairs. Bad chairs. Good law." The carrier sent a picture, not a filing its barge crew smiling weakly next to hoses running clear coolant into vats that had held old heat. A small kid in the frame held up 2 fingers, then looked embarrassed, and held up 3 because 2 felt like victory, and 3 felt like a promise. Mara didn't know if she could hold a promise that felt like that for 30 days. She would try. Trying was the liturgy. Kestrel whispered the week's to-do list into her ear like a prayer. Ortiz paged through radiator repair flow charts like they were tarot. Sato committed to memory the faces of apprentices who had sorted injunctions with a beauty that made her ache. She would teach them what she knew, then teach them to teach. Teach until you are replaced by someone kinder and sharper. The anchorage lowered its hum to an almost subsonic purr as the arrays cooled. Thin threads of vapor ghosted from cracked segments where Wayfarer's patchwork hadn't quite sealed perfect. The Saint ship let the flaws remain visible a while longer. They were part of the story, and stories needed scars to be true. Mara lifted her hand from the sigil. The nested squares continued to glow faintly for a few seconds, before settling to a steady blue like a pilot light. The public feed flowed past her like a river. Ledger entries blinked into existence in sober, small fonts, then dimmed as they paid and filed and made room. A single droplet of condensed moisture slid along a handrail near her knee, fattened by breath, then fell. She spoke softly, because microphones make whispers loud if you set them right. "We cut nothing we cannot mend," she said. "We count everything we cannot prevent. We will not forget the names we wrote in dust today. The court will meet on time. The ledger will stay open. If we fail, we will step down. If we succeed, we will step aside when the lesson no longer needs our voice." Her palm lay flat on the sigil one last time. The glow brightened just for her. The ledger on the feed blinked once like a tiny heart. The arrays cooled in sighs that felt human. "We are the stewards who chose to keep the light."